Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of J.S. Bach's chorale harmonizations. Here we're looking at Gelobet, seist du Jesu Christ, which translates to Praised be you, Jesus Christ. We have looked at this text in the past, however it's been quite some time since we've last analyzed a chorale that's used this text, and this is a really fascinating one. We're going to hop right into the analysis because I'm just going to cover all the interesting tidbits as we get to them. So, two sharps in the key signature. We start with D major and we end with A major. And this is one of the sort of fascinating things. I think even though we start in the key of D major here, the overall tonality of this chorale is A major, which is fascinating because of the amount of time that we spend in D major and the key signature. So, first chord, already an interesting thing. F sharp minor, F sharp A, C sharp, and A, which is our 3 chord. However, I think there's an argument to be made that this is also 1/6 and the C sharp is an accented non-chord tone. But I'm going to analyze these as 3. It's the first chord we hear. The first instant that we hear a chord in this chorale sounds like F sharp minor. This becomes kind of a motivic chord throughout the rest of the chorale as well. So I'll point out the points that include this 3 that could also be interpreted as 1/6. But afterwards we go straight to 5, C sharp, A, E, and A, which is A major over C sharp, and then we go right to D major, D, D, F sharp, and A again, our tonic triad. G, B, F sharp, and B is G major 7 potentially. However, I feel like what actually is happening here is this F is a 7/6 suspension over the bass, and this is actually E minor over G. So I'm going to analyze this as 2/6, 4/7 versus 2/6, 5 actually, because we have a, sorry, I wrote it over the wrong chord, 7/5 doesn't really mean much to us. But yes, 2/6/5 versus 4/7, largely the same chord, both in function and pitch content. And this chord takes us to G, C sharp, E, and A, which is 5/4/2. A7 over G. This F sharp's a non-chord tone, this E is a non-chord tone, and we would expect a 4/2 chord to resolve a 5th down in the bass by step, which would be a 1/6 chord, F sharp, D, A, and D, which is 1/6. So that's where it resolves to, where we would expect D is a chord tone, E is a little brief passing tone here, and with F sharp we very, very briefly get a fully realized root position tonic triad here. And right before a perfect authentic cadence, we get C sharp, A, and E, which is our 5 chord, A major, passing 7th in the alto, and then we cadence on D major, D, A, F sharp, and D, tonic triad. Next phrase ends in a perfect authentic cadence in the key of A major, so we're getting a modulation relatively early. We start off with D major going to A major. It doesn't quite sound like we've moved to the key of A yet, not enough G sharp action for me to really legitimize A major being a likely key at this point. I think we're modulating around beat 3 here. A, E, and C sharp is still our 5 chord. We have some passing tones in the upper voices, which does give us a bit of a tonic triad in passing, and I think that that's significant because we're going sort of against the grain here, 5 going to 2. It's not that we haven't seen 5 going to 2 in the past, but the fact that when we see a non-normative chord progression, that is like a chord that goes down a 5th or a chord that is adjacent regarding the roots of the chords, Bach often intersperses these passing chords that are very brief or sort of implied subdivisions of the harmony here. So it's not really contributing too much to the overall progression, but it is separating 2 chords that are less likely to go from one to the other than, say, 5 go to 1, or maybe even 5 go to 6 or 3. We have G natural, B, D, and E, or sorry, G, B, G, and E, which is E minor over G. That's 2/6, and that takes us to another one of these ambivalent chords, F sharp, A, and F sharp. Sorry, this is a C sharp, F sharp, C sharp, A, and F sharp, which is F sharp minor. 2 going to 3 I feel is more common than 2 going to 1, but I guess you could interpret this as a 1/6 chord as well. But I'm going to call this D, a passing tone here. This F sharp is still a chord tone, and this also happens to be where I think we modulate to A major, where this 3 turns into 6. We then have G sharp, E, B, and E, which is our 5 chord, E major over G sharp, 5, 6, passing 7th in the melody before we get A, E, B, and C sharp. This B is a 7-6 suspension over the bass. When we take the rest of the chord, we have A major, A, E, A, and C sharp, which is our tonic in root position. We then go to E, E, A, and B. This A is another suspension. This time it's a 4-3 suspension over the bass, and this is a 5 chord E major. Before we cadence on A major, A, C sharp, E, and A, which is our tonic in root position. Next phrase is where it gets really interesting. We get a perfect authentic cadence in the key of E major. Now, when I was first listening to this chorale, I was thinking in the frame of mind of D major. And when you think in the frame of mind of D major, well, it's a distant modulation, right? D and E are not adjacent to one another on the circle of fifths. Therefore, modulations between those keys are uncommon. And in this case, we still are getting a modulation between D major and E major, which are distant keys. But in the grand scheme of the chorale, we're framing it around A major. D is a likely destination from A, and E is a likely destination from A. So the E major focus makes a lot more sense. So we are going to move to the key of D major. A major becomes our 5 chord in the key of D major, and we move right to our tonic D major, D, D, F sharp, and A, which is, like I said, our tonic, passing 7th in the bass, and then we get B, D, F sharp again, and D, which is B minor. That's our 6 chord. We have some passing tones in the inner voices here. E and G kind of give us a G major 7 vibe, or sorry, an E minor 7 vibe, like a 2-6 over B. Yeah, 6 does want to go to 2. Maybe I will put a 2-4-3 little chord going on there, which is kind of interesting when we see 2 of the voices move. But just like a progression we saw earlier, we see 2 going to 3 here. In this 3 chord, F sharp, A, and C sharp is our 3 chord in the key of D minor. I think this begins the modulation zone that potentially could indicate that we've modulated to the key of E major, but I don't really hear it happening until the beat afterwards. So we have another one of these 3 chords that could also be interpreted as 1-6, just because this passing D in the melody could be kind of in the same way this 3 chord could be interpreted as 1-6, but it really sounds a lot more like F sharp minor than D major over F sharp to me. And then after our 3 chord, we go where we did in the first phrase, where we have 3 going to 5, 6, C sharp, E, A, and E. And I think this is where we modulate to the key of E major. This is now our 4-6 chord. And just like with 4-6 progressions that ascend like this, we always have this passing tone in the bass linking to our tonic when we go from 4-6 to 1, E, E, G sharp, and B. Tonic triad. This B is also a chord tone. We then have D sharp, B, F sharp, and A, which is B7 over D sharp. That's 5, 6, 5. And then we have some non-chord tones, E, E, and G sharp, spelling E major when we take all of the tones. That's our tonic. And then we have B major again, B, B, E, and F sharp, but this E is a 4-3 suspension over the bass. This is really a 5 chord B major. And then we cadence on E major, E, G sharp, B, and E, which is our tonic triad in root position. Next phrase, definitely the maker's mark of this chorale. We have interesting mid-phrase modulations abound. We start in the key of E major, we move to the key of B minor, which is pretty interesting, and then we make our way back to A major, which will then take us out to the end of the chorale. So we start things off with E going to A major, A, C sharp, and E. That is our 4 chord, passing 7th in the tenor. Then we have A, F sharp, D sharp, and B, which is B7 over A, 5, 4, 2. We know how we would typically see this resolve, but in an interesting fashion, just like how Bach has been using a lot of 3 chords, in this chorale. We see this 5-4-2 chord not go to 1-6, but the 3, which is kind of like a 1-6 chord, but it has D in it rather than E. G sharp, B, D, and B. So it goes to a 3 chord here, and it eventually resolves, but the bass does resolve down by step. So resolving to a 3 chord is very similar to resolving to 1-6, so this is an unusual resolution, but we eventually get our resolution to 1 on the next beat. But before we do that, we have F sharp, A, D, and B. And the reason why I feel like this is significant is A, because we've seen 3 go to 5-6 in the past. This is a second to 4-3. 3 going to 5-4-3 is a progression that we've seen Bach use in his previous chorales. And the fact that he's separating like 3 going to 1, which is a relatively unusual progression for Bach to use. The fact that we're seeing 3 get separated with a 5 chord that then resolves to the tonic seems significant in the grander scheme of the progression. E, G sharp, E, and B are tonic. But interestingly though, we get this passing D natural here, which is indicating to us that perhaps this is either functioning as like a secondary dominant chord, like 5 of 4, or if you look at what's also happening in the tenor, G sharp, A sharp, B, we have a melodic minor fragment in terms of B. So we've either moved to the key of B, and this is our 4 chord, or we've moved to the key of B minor, and it's also our 4 chord, but a byproduct of harmonizing the melodic minor scale 4 with a passing 7th in the bass. And then we get C sharp, A sharp, E, and C sharp, which is 7-6, A sharp diminished over C sharp. And as we approach our cadence, it starts to get pretty hefty in terms of the counterpoint going on here. We have B, B, D, and D, which is our tonic triad, B minor, 2 roots, 2 thirds. Kind of an interesting spelling, but a B minor chord nonetheless. Passing 7th in the tenor, passing tone in the alto before we get B, G, D, and B. So I think there's an argument to be made that this is a 6-6 chord, G major over B. And then we have these passing tones going on here, these delayed passing tones. We have C sharp and we have E. C sharp, G, E, and B spells C sharp minor 7 flat 5, which is 2-7, so we see 6 going to 2. We saw this progression earlier as well as a subdivided progression, so it's interesting that we're seeing it used again. And we would expect 2 to go to 5, but instead of going to 5, Bach goes to 3, D, F sharp, and A, which is kind of like saying that this C sharp chord, we saw this progression yesterday actually, or the chorales sort of blend together for me in terms of which specific episode it incorporated this progression, but because of the nature of the minor scale, 2 and 3 kind of feel like 2 is the leading tone chord to 3 because it's a diminished chord and it's a half step below 3, so it kind of feels like it's tonicizing it a bit. So just by virtue of the fact that the chords are adjacent to one another, they also feel like a dominant tonic resolution. And this is where I think we're going back to the key of A major as well, where D major is also our 4 chord. Okay, after our 4 chord, we have some passing tones in the melody and the tenor. G sharp, B, D, and F sharp is a 7-7 chord, more specifically 7-4-3. The bass doesn't really matter too much in these passing chords because the bass is static and it doesn't really have a huge impact on the overall chord progression, but it is a 4 going to 7 progression, which is a really common subdivided chord progression in the chorales. Then this resolves to 1, C sharp, A, E, and C sharp, more specifically 1-6. And before we get our half cadence here in the key of A major, we have some passing tones in the alto and the bass, which sort of, I guess, accompany or complement the previous passing tones that we had. D sharp, F sharp, A, and C sharp spells D sharp minor 7 flat 5, which is 7/7 of 5, because D sharp is the leading tone to E, and then we cadence on E, E, G sharp, and B, which is our 5 chord. And we're going to stay in the key of A major until the rest of the chorale. We start off with F sharp, C sharp, F sharp, and A, which, similar to the way that we started our chorale, even though we were in the key of D major at the start of our chorale, it's a very similar progression to what we have. In this case, F sharp minor is our 6th chord, or 4/6. It's a roundabout way of also saying 3 or 1/6. We then go to C sharp, E, and A. We might be tempted to call this a 1/6 chord, but if we look at this G natural here, I think it's implying that A is actually functioning as 5/6 of 4, because A also happens to be the dominant of D, and it's this flatted 7th here that makes us feel like D is going to be the next chord that we get, and that happens to be the case. D, F sharp, E, and A. This E is a 9/8 suspension over the bass. Bach loves 9/8 suspensions over D chords, more specifically D minor chords, but we do see them with D major chords every once in a while. A is a chord tone, D is a chord tone, this E is a little brief passing tone before we get D, D, F sharp, and A. No need to reanalyze. And then we cadence on A major, A, C sharp, E, and A again, which is our tonic triad, making this a plagal cadence. We end the chorale on a plagal cadence, which is really unusual. Typically we expect an authentic cadence at the end of the chorale, but more recently than not, we've been seeing a lot of chorales that have ended with authentic cadences, like imperfect authentic cadences or half cadences. So this is kind of unusual to see such a lengthy string of chorales that end with cadences that are not authentic, or perfect authentic to be more specific. But that's going to be today's analysis. A couple of the takeaways are the use of 3. We see 3 used in much larger proportion than we typically do. We see, I haven't counted the overall number of chords in this chorale, but we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 3 chords in a relatively short chorale, and 3 being the most underused chord in Bach's harmonic vocabulary. That's really just more so a byproduct of tonality in general, or just the tonal practices of the period, because of the fact that I speculate that 3 and 1 are very similar to one another, and 3 is just another stable chord that sort of gets overshadowed by 1. Not that it's an inferior chord or anything, it just has to do with the fact that it's very similar to 1 in terms of its function. And the majority of the time we see it as a resolution from 7 or something that's in and around 4. We do see it does get its fair share of use. But other than that, we have some distant modulations. D to E is one of them, and then E major to B minor is another one. The fact that we don't end on an authentic cadence is another takeaway from this chorale. Mid-phrase modulations as well. We start in D major, and then we go to E major, which is kind of interesting. And then here we start in E major, go to B minor, and end in A major. So 2 mid-phrase modulations going on in this chorale, or this phrase rather. And the last one is this sort of unusual 4/2 resolution. 4/2 going to 3 rather than 5. Oh goodness, so sorry about that. 5/4/2 going to 3 rather than 1/6. But again, connecting the role of 3 in this tonal narrative to 1, they're very similar to one another, and 3 is even more similar to 1 in the sense that 5/4/2 typically would resolve to 1/6. But here it's resolving to 3. They have the same bass and mostly the same pitch content, but 3 has definitely played a role in this particular chorale. Definitely something to take note of. So if you're interested in following me along on the journey to analyze all of Bach's chorale harmonizations, feel free to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification icon as well, and like the video if you enjoyed the content. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for supporting the channel by doing so. I look forward to tomorrow's analysis, and I hope you take care.